1974, the quiet, unsuspecting town of Wichita, Kansas. Neighborhoods felt so safe that doors were often left unlocked. But that gentle illusion was shattered into jagged pieces on a freezing January morning. The Otero family, a mother, a father, and two innocent children, were discovered inside their own home. They weren't just murdered, they were bound, left helpless, and slowly strangled. It wasn't a panicked robbery. It was a dark, deliberate ritual of absolute control. The air in that house must have been thick with their final, desperate breaths. The town was plunged into a suffocating terror, folks frantically deadbolting doors and jumping at every creaking floorboard. They didn't know it yet, but this shadow had just tasted fear, and he was waiting in the dark to hunt again. Months dragged on, and the blood in Wichita ran cold as the police hit dead end after dead end. The monster in the shadows grew restless. He didn't just want to take lives, he craved the spotlight. He wanted the world to tremble at his name. So, he reached out from the darkness. A chilling letter was found tucked inside a textbook at the public library. In this twisted manifesto, he claimed the Otero massacre, sharing sickening details only the true fiend could know. Then, he did something that made the city's stomach drop. He gave himself a title. He demanded to be known by three terrifying letters: BTK. He spelled out his sinister calling card with absolute pride. Bind them, torture them, kill them. The boogeyman now had a voice made of ink, and he promised he was far from finished. How does a monster hide in the broad daylight? He doesn't lurk in the deep woods. He walks right beside you on the pavement. He was the man installing your security alarms, the ordinary neighbor waving from across the quiet street. For years, he perfected the dark art of the hunt. He would pick his prey with chilling patience, watching their daily routines, learning exactly when they left for work and when. The house stood empty. He'd slip inside, silent as a ghost, snipping the telephone lines so there could be no desperate call for help. Then, he would wait in the suffocating silence of a bedroom closet or tucked beneath a bed. Imagine coming home, locking your door against the dangers of the outside world, completely unaware that the nightmare was already locked inside with you, breathing softly in the dark. He didn't just want to take their lives. He wanted to own the entire city's mind. The police were running in exhausting circles, chasing nothing but phantoms, and he absolutely reveled in their desperate, sweaty confusion. It became a sickening, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. He started leaving breadcrumbs for the authorities, dropping chilling poems and cryptic riddles in the most mundane, everyday places. A cereal box at a grocery store, a random shelf at the public library. Suddenly, the mundane world felt rigged with traps. He mailed thick packages containing the personal belongings of those he slaughtered, horrifying souvenirs of his darkest deeds, straight to the local news desks. Every time the pale anchors read his twisted words on the evening broadcast, the monster was feeding on their panic. Then, just as suddenly as the nightmare began, the screaming stopped. The taunting letters ceased arriving at the news stations. The brutalized bodies were no longer found bound in their quiet suburban bedrooms. Years began to bleed into decades. The cold, hard files of the unsolved murders gathered a thick layer of dust in the police precinct archives. A whole new generation grew up in Wichita, Kansas, hearing the terrifying tales of the Phantom Killer like a dark urban legend whispered at sleepovers. The frantic deadbolting of doors slowly relaxed. People began to cautiously exhale. daring to believe that the monster was finally in his grave or rotting in some distant prison cell. But true evil doesn't just die quietly. It burrows deep into the earth, holding its breath, waiting patiently. 30 long years had passed since his first kill. The terrified children of 1974 were now adults with families of their own. The phantom was a fading memory. But then, in the crisp air of March 2004, a local newspaper received a plain, unassuming envelope. Inside was a chilling echo from the grave. A letter taking credit for a 1986 murder that police had never connected to him, complete with crime scene photos and a photocopy of the victim's missing driver's license. The blood in the veins of the Wichita police froze solid. The ghost hadn't died. He had just been watching from the shadows all along. The nightmare had violently ripped open its eyes once again, and the sickening realization set in. The monster was still walking among them, older, but just as deadly. The beast was starving, not for blood this time, but for the one thing his twisted ego craved above all else: absolute adoration from the terrified masses. He couldn't stand that a new generation didn't tremble at his name. So, he began to taunt the authorities with reckless abandon. In a moment of sheer arrogance, he asked the police a fatal question through a local newspaper ad. Could a floppy disk be traced back to him? The detectives, holding their breath, played their brilliant hand. They lied. They published a public response assuring him it was completely safe. Believing he was the smartest man in the room, the monster slipped a purple floppy disk into a padded envelope and sent it to a local television station. He thought he was invincible, entirely unaware he had just handed them the key to his cage. The trap snapped shut with a resounding click. That purple floppy disk held a hidden digital footprint, a deleted document traced directly to a local Christ Lutheran church and a user named Dennis. The police quietly swooped in, matching his DNA to a medical sample taken from his own daughter. Then came the freezing morning of February 25, 2005. As Dennis Rader drove towards his house, patrol cars swarmed him from every direction. The boogeyman was finally in chains, but the absolute, bone-chilling horror was his unmasking. He wasn't a disfigured phantom hiding in a dark alleyway. He was the friendly city compliance officer. He was a devoted husband, a father, a Boy Scout leader, and the highly respected president of his church congregation. The devil had been living right next door all along. The courtroom doors swung open, and the monster stepped into the harsh fluorescent light, looking like any ordinary grandfather in a crisp suit. But as he opened his mouth, the temperature in the room plummeted. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for a shred of forgiveness. Instead, he began to recount 30 years of unimaginable terror with the cold, calculated precision of a man reading a grocery list. He sat before the judge, detailing exactly how he hunted, bound, and extinguished the lives of 10 innocent people. He described his dark projects and his twisted hit kits as if he were discussing a casual weekend hobby. The families of the victims sat paralyzed, forced to listen to the absolute darkness that had stolen their loved ones, realizing that true evil has no conscience, only a terrifyingly calm voice. The courtroom breathed a heavy sigh of relief, yet a bitter taste lingered in the air. The monster had finally been dragged into the light, completely stripped of his terrifying power. But the devil always seems to find one last loophole, doesn't he? Because his very last known victim was suffocated in 1991, just a few short years before the state of Kansas brought back the executioner's needle. The law couldn't put him to death. The families wept. realizing he would never face the ultimate punishment he so ruthlessly dealt to their loved ones. Instead, the judge handed down 10 consecutive life sentences, banishing him to a cold, concrete cage. The boogeyman was finally locked away in a tiny, soundproof box, left to rot in absolute obscurity, where no one will ever hear his twisted voice again.
Inside. Now.